Welcome to Our Hometown, the show where we take an in-depth look at some of the people and organizations that make this area unique. This month we have a special guest who will give us not only a glimpse into the history of the county, but also a reflection of what it was like to grow up here. District Judge Marion Warren will be joining us today for the show, so we invite you to stay with us for the next half hour as we explore our hometown. My guest today is Marion Warren. Most of you in Brunswick County will know Marion Warren as Judge Marion Warren. He's a district court judge here in Brunswick County and Bladen and Columbus counties. Judge, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mr. Clerk. Thanks, Jim.
I'm excited to talk to you about the last 30 or 40 years here in Brunswick County. You know, most of us are transplants. We got here as soon as we could, the last 5 or 10 or 15 or even 20 years. You're a native, and my experience with you is that you have some great stories to tell, and so I'd like to have a little conversation with you the next 30 minutes, and I know it will go well.
Thank you, Jim. Love to share. It's a great place to live.
Let's talk just a little bit about your background because our viewers will be interested to know that. Campbell University.
Yes, sir.
Undergraduate and law school.
Yes, sir.
And upon graduating from law school, you returned to Brunswick County, and you've been here since then either as an attorney, an assistant district attorney, and for a number of years as our district judge.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's talk about agriculture 10, 20, 30 years ago. Tell us a little bit about what it was like here in Brunswick County.
Jim, let's talk about, if you don't mind, let's turn our attention to a number where we all can probably get our hands on and remember pretty well.
Sure.
For a lot of our viewers. 1970. Let's talk about from 1970 up.
Good.
Brunswick County was a much different place. And me and my family, we're all Brunswick County natives. My mom's folks have been here since the middle of the 18th century. My dad's folks have been here almost that long. We all live on our family farms except my sister, but she married a Brunswick County native, and all of my family still lives in this county, all of my immediate family.
Great.
My children are going to the same school that I went to, and that my nieces and nephews went to, and that my brothers and sisters went to, and that my mom and dad went to. The kind of place that Brunswick County used to be back then. My dad's 83. And the lady that was his 4th grade teacher lived in our community, taught my dad, my mom, my brother, who's 11 years older than me, my sister, who's 9 years older than me. I was in her class grade, but I was not under her direct supervision or tutelage. My nieces and my nephews all had that one lady as a teacher.
Mention her name.
That would be Miss Lillian Watts.
Right.
She was from the Kingtown community in Ash, and Miss Lillian was one of those folks that if you came out of her class, you learned one way or another. And I mean, it's that kind of community.
That's a story of small town Americana.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Except no streets, no paved streets, no curbs, no kids on the bikes, no paper routes as such, no Mayberry. Because in Brunswick County, we didn't have a lot of paved roads. There were no 4-lane highways. Agriculture and manufacturing, believe it or not, was the two things that employed the most folks and put bread on the table.
Let's spend a minute on each of those. Let's talk about agriculture, and then we'll mention manufacturing.
Okay. It seemed like everyone was a family farmer, even if they had what we called a public job. A public job was not working at home. A public job was interacting with the community. My dad's public job was working at Regalwood or Federal Paper, either one. He retired there after 34 years of service. A lot of people had teachers in their family. A lot of people had second jobs. But farming tended to be something everyone had back then. Agriculture in their background.
Was tobacco a big issue?
Tobacco was the crop.
Okay.
There was, like I mentioned earlier, manufacturing. There was a light fishing industry with an industrial fishing industry here down towards Southport. And then the rest of the county were a collection of small family farms centered around a small community. Generally, that community had a school. And that's how these parts of the county that our folks that are now our friends and neighbors identify as larger areas. You still know Ash is Walkmall because that's where the school is.
Now, before we went on the air, you mentioned that there were quite a few more districts than there are now. Can you recall those numbers?
Oh, absolutely. The way education worked back then is it was restricted by transportation.
Sure.
Some of the best stories my daddy tells is when he was a bus driver with a 1934 Chevrolet school bus, and they let him keep it, and he would travel all over the world with it just as long as he could top it back up with his own gasoline.
Yeah.
But there were several bills that reorganized schools in the county, and the School Act of '27 brought what we would now call neighborhood schools as more than 20. More than 25, down to 16.
Okay.
And that's where our larger high schools were built. The best example that's still standing is Bolivia Elementary School. That was Bolivia High School.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at West Brunswick, since
Okay.
we're right across the street here from
Sure.
the ATMC facilities. Yeah. But my brother, who's also here at ATMC today, my brother was one of the first classes to be in the new high school at West Brunswick Consolidation in '72, and one of the last classes of Waccamaw. He was not the last graduating class, he was the next to the last. So he was virtually the first graduating class at West Brunswick.
Coming back to agriculture for just a minute, we talked about tobacco. Any other major products that you can recall?
Well, it's pretty much the way it is today. It's just the scale. Like I said, everyone was had a family farm, just about it seemed. Tobacco, from 1 to 10, a huge tobacco farm back then would have been 50 acres, a little more. But that would have been a huge farm. Right. Almost what we would call industrial or agriculture or agribusiness. So you had an allotment. Our original allotment system started, and that was how many pounds you were allowed to grow.
Sure.
It was a result of the agricultural reforms and programs of the Great Depression. We had X number of pounds that we could plant the whole county, divided by the number of farmers that planted it. They extended and made allotments bigger, but generally there were smaller allotments.
Yeah. Now, we know that tourism is such a giant industry here in our county now, but our viewers will be surprised to know that there was heavy manufacturing and heavy industry here in the county 20 and 30 and 40 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, we had both heavy manufacturing here, which was our main push, our thrust of regional economic and county economic development. The biggest feather in the hat of our region was when when our county was the site for EIE, Nemore, DuPont to come. Now we call it DuPont. Now it's DAC America, and it's closing up now. But that was a huge industry. That was, that was a chemical plant, but it was not the only chemical plant. There was a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility here in the county, up in the northeastern corner of the county. Pfizer, which is now the ADM facility down towards Southport on the Cape Fear River. That was a huge coup. Other heavy manufacturing was Brunswick County is the site of one of the 3 nuclear power plants that North Carolina has operating. That was huge for Brunswick County. It still is. If you go up toward the Columbus County line, near where the paper mill is my dad worked at, I mentioned earlier, Regalwood. Yeah. If you go up that way, there were 4 or 5 family-owned chemical manufacturing plants such as Wright Chemical. They did all kinds of things. They did analytical chemistry, they made chlorine compounds, they made chemicals for folks all over the world, and specifically did chemical processes for the paper mill, and they did some stuff for DuPont. The other thing folks might be surprised to realize, Jim, is that we actually, we're not on the fall of the river, we're not anything like that, but local entrepreneurs aggressively recruited small business to come in here, small light manufacturing. Sure. In my community, we had a sewing plant. It was an incredible boon to our community. It employed a lot of our folks that were no longer on the farm. There was one in Shalott off of Smith Avenue right over here. I'm told by my mom and dad that there's one more, and I can't tell you where it is. That was really before my time. And the interesting thing, you were talking about tourism being an industry. Before 1950, none of the beaches were incorporated. If you go back and you interview...
And most of them didn't have bridges.
Correct. That's exactly right. I was exactly getting ready to say that. Yeah. And they didn't have bridges. If they had anything, they had ferries. The bridges, the swing bridges didn't come in until just a little later after that. And
the waterway came in the late 30s, am I right?
The waterway came in, was dug through our part of the state starting in 32. So what other folks know as Brick Landing, where Brick Landing Plantation is, places like that, that was Brantley Island. and it was separated by not the waterway, but by Goose Creek and Saspan Creek, and it was an island unto itself. It was the waterway created and changed a lot of things, but that land was not as valuable as the interior land when farming was king.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
You can't grow corn with salt water blowing on it.
Let's talk about the county and its history on the ocean, on the waterway, fishing, and the industries that arise from being on the ocean.
Surprisingly, there was not as much fish processing here as you would think. Back in '70, I think we have now the same amount of seafood processing facilities. Back in 1970, we had 3. I think we still have 3, maybe 4. The one that comes to mind that I'm most familiar with would be Lloyd's Oyster House down at Village Point Road on Shalote Point.
Sure.
He's a national figure in seafood processing and supply, but he's still right there at Shalote Point.
Yeah.
There were other little oyster and fish houses around. Every coastal community that I remember, from Varnum Town all the way down to the Calabash River, there were several family-owned and operated fish houses where folks would go out, day fish, bring their catch back in, and sell it to the fish house.
But compared then to now, it was a significant industry then, and it continues to be today.
Right, with one exception,
Okay.
that I think our folks, I wish that they could have appreciated as we did. There were those days, Jim, where we had a break from tobacco season, or we had stopped farming tobacco or whatever, that my parents would take me to Ocean Isle Beach or Sunset Beach. We typically went to Ocean Isle, and the wind would shift, and it would come from the southeast, and you would smell this pungent, indescribably horrible scent, odor, would come from towards Southport. And what it was the pogie plant.
Fish processing?
Fish processing. And a lot of people now, because it's a bait fish, it's still a very important fish around here.
Absolutely.
But it was the basis for fish meal, fish oil, fertilizer, dog food, pet food of any kind. They tell me it had just hundreds of industrial and agricultural purposes.
Right.
And millions of pounds of pogies were menhaden, were harvested off of our shores. And the pogie boats were just as bad as the plants, because the pogie boats, like if you see a fishing boat off our beaches now, you're generally seeing either a recreational fisherman or the occasional shrimper. A pogie boat was awful. I mean, those smelly, oily fish, and the pogie boats would come by, and some of them would be industrial pogie boats from other places, and they would actually be processing the fish on the boat.
Right.
And wow, how awful. But Fish Factory Road, it had a pogie plant on it. There were several commercial processing operations or industrial fish processing operations in the Southport area across the time. My interest in that was because of that scene. I wanted to find out more about it when I was a young man, when I was a child actually. And you know, the first commercial fishing operation that you can find record, and it's in the State Port Pilot actually, a fishing boat came down from New Jersey and fished for trout and drum, had a fabulous catch, salted it, and took it back. And the captain of that boat recommended for other folks to do the same thing, because we had fish houses. There was the huge pogie operation, and then beside the ferries, we had fish camps. Now, from folks from the interior part of this state and other places, a fish camp is a house next to a pond or a restaurant next to a pond where they serve seafood.
Right.
A fish camp for us, or used to be, is a temporary and then later became a more permanent, if you had prosperous friends among your fishermen, that would be built out of cinder block, but a shelter or shed where friends and family from various communities would come down and they would net fish for meat. And they would catch. When the spots and the mullets were running, you'd come in and it started out by doing it with hands, and I understand with mules, and then at the end there'd be that tractor pulling that net from the beach. So you've got this scene of a lot of men and children standing around on a tractor hovering one end of the net and pulling it up on the beach and being processed at fish camp.
I can just picture that.
And it was just a different time.
We're going to take a brief break. We'll be back in just a moment, and we'll talk about church life in Brunswick County.
Is 6:30 too early for a Get Fit workout? Are your weeknights too hectic to catch the West Brunswick football? Do you find yourself missing all your favorite ATMC TV shows? Well, now you don't have to. ATMC TV is airing all their latest shows on demand. Stop, pause, fast forward, or rewind. Watch your shows on your time. Tune to Channel 1 to see shows like Brunswick Biz, Get Fit, The Coastal Kitchen, and more. Stay connected to beautiful Brunswick County with ATMC TV on demand. Brought to you free by ATMC.
Okay, we're back with Judge Warren, and Judge, I promised our viewers we'd talk a little bit about church life because churches were the basis of social interaction in these small communities, and there's been quite a change, so tell us about that.
Oh, it's been a huge, tremendous change in the course of, like I said, let's go to 1974.
Sure.
And my perspective on that's a little unique. I was the moderator of the Brunswick Baptist Association. When I was the moderator, we had 44 and then 43 churches.
Okay.
And those were all churches that were affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. If you look back to 1970 and compare it to here, we had 43 members of that association.
Right.
You had one Presbyterian church, and it was out actually in the middle of the woods in Winnebago. It's called New Hope Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
And it is a gorgeous, beautiful church. Still in use today, has a fine congregation. There wasn't a Lutheran church. We didn't have all of these community chapels. You didn't see. There was not a Jehovah's Witness congregation on 211 and 17.
No independent churches.
There would be transitional churches.
Okay.
But there was a Roman Catholic church at a place called Farmers Turnout.
Tell us where that is.
Now it's the one down there at Dozier Cutoff in Southport.
Okay.
And that building, the original building for that church came from a Catholic church in Columbus County. And then there was the oldest established parish here in the county, of course, is St. Philip's down in Smithfield or Southport now.
Right.
And that's still in existence.
That's the Episcopal Church.
That's the Episcopal Church, and it's what it calls it. I think it now refers to it's the old chapel or the chapel.
Chapel of the Cross.
The Chapel of the Cross. That was actually built in the 1850s. Mm-hmm. So it's not the oldest church building because one of the oldest churches, actually there are two very old Baptist churches here. You have Mount Pisgah, which absolutely is a mother church of this county from the 1760s. Mm-hmm. It first ministered to sailors and area farmers and folks in the community. And that's another, you need to find somebody from the Stone Chimney Supply Brown Landing area to tell you about all of the unique things there and how it got its name Stone Chimney. And then in Kingdown there's New Britain, which was the old New Britain Road. It's over 200 years now too. It was like 1810. And from those two places up in my part of the county all the way down to the Holden Beach supply area, they filled in. Methodist and Baptist churches were the dominant denominations in the types of churches we had, and they're very similar in worship and style and service and,
sure.
and thought and feel. And it does really the Baptist churches and the Methodist churches, we overlap really well.
Sure.
And so the church was the primary center and hub of the community for a lot of our areas.
And
it still
in many
is.
ways still is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, but once again, transportation being an issue. A lot of dirt, sandy roads. We're not talking about muddy roads. We're not talking about improved dirt roads. We're talking about sandy tracks in the middle of the woods.
All right.
A spidery network putting isolated communities together.
You created a transition for me because let's understand that the courthouse years gone by was in Southport.
Right.
This is a huge county, and I've heard that for those at the far end of the county, it could be an all-day trip to the courthouse and back.
It was absolutely an all-day trip. For the folks in my end of the county in Ashe, we were oriented toward Conway, Wilmington, Tabor City, even Myrtle Beach to do our shopping when Myrtle Beach started to take off and have retail areas. Wilmington was unless you had family there, it was just so far away, and 17 was, it was just an all-day trip.
Right.
Southport was the same thing. It was like the other end of the world. I went to Wilmington more than I went to Southport.
Yeah.
To get to 211 on paved roads, 211 being the main artery going from
Sure.
Columbus County all the way down to Southport, from the county line down to Southport. We had a couple of options. You could drive, well, you only had one option to stay on a paved road, or you could cut through the woods past where I live now, go about 10 or 15 miles through the woods and on a dirt road that was actually maintained by the paper companies, and they actually did a really good job until you got to 211, and then you drive down. Or you would go from Ash to Shallotte, go through the entire business district of Shallotte, then make it to Supply, which is only 9 miles away but felt like an eternity behind that car going 35 miles an hour.
Sure.
Load it with produce, hay, chickens, cows,
And
whatever.
then catch 211.
And then hit 211. And then it was a lonely, hot trek
Yeah, I'm sure.
through this sea of green, because there was nothing but pine trees from Supply, or from Lennon's Egg Farm, where Virginia Williams Elementary School is now. From Lennon's Egg Farm until you got to the road around A.I. Clemens Road or around Sunset Harbor. In that community, there was a small community of folks there. And then it was just forever to get into Southport.
All right, I'm jumping around on you. I want to talk about storms, which are truly a part of the history of this county. I'm going to pass on 1954, which was Hazel, but let's talk about Floyd, which was 98 or 99.
Right.
Tell us a story or two about Floyd.
Floyd was not the tragic storm that Hazel was. If you find any native that was around in Hazel, like when the president was shot, when the World Trade Center
Sure.
came down, it was one of those events.
Absolutely.
We were surprised by Hazel. We were caught unaware. Floyd, it came, and it just wouldn't go away.
Right, that's what I understand.
We didn't have to worry about the winds that much. We didn't have to worry about the tides that much.
It was 20 or so inches of rain, right?
Who knows at this point? It
Yeah.
was more, it sure seemed like more than 2 feet. It seemed like 4.
Yeah.
And it stayed and it stayed and it stayed and it stayed. And it started becoming a biblical proportion. I mean, it was just the rain, and then it sort of stopped. But this is a big county, Jim, and you can only absorb so much water. And when the storm left, the water stayed, and it started to rise. And, we're downriver.
Right.
And we got our neighboring counties' water. And the Waccamaw River had already swollen beyond its banks. The Shallotte River had, when the hurricane was coming up, they had shrimp boats tied up at the river bridge at Camp Methodist. I mean,
I've seen pictures of Main Street underwater
absolutely.
in Shallotte.
Well, but to give you an illustration, where I'm from out in Ash, we're the highest part of the county for all practical purposes.
Sure.
Behind Waccamaw Schools, I understand the highest point in the whole county, something like 68, 69, maybe even 70 feet. Where I live is a pretty high sand ridge, and the water never got up to my house. But if you go out in the Myrtlehead community, which is still in Ash, but it's the next community over around the next church,
Sure.
you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Right down the road about 7 miles. It's right on the edge of the Columbus County line. And so it was more like you were driving through a shallow lake to get from an island of houses to an island of houses to wherever you're going. And I actually witnessed this. Trent Evans, who had a small shrimp boat, and when I mean a small shrimp boat, I'm not talking about it like a 28-footer. I'm talking about a real shrimp boat, a day
Sure.
boat, what we would call a day boat. And but it was small enough he could trailer it. And he got his shrimp boat, and somehow either he had it near his home, because actually I think that's exactly what happened. He had it near his home or parked somewhere to keep it from being damaged during the storm. Instead of taking it back down to the waterway or putting it in the river, he backed it to the intersection of Kingtown and Myrtlehead Road. And the river, and that's near where the Waccamaw River and the Run of Alligator, or Juniper Creek actually, Juniper Creek meet. And all of that was flooded. And I watched him back that boat down the high side of the road into the water, unloaded the boat on a state highway, turned it around, cranked it up, and level planed off a shrimp boat on a state highway.
And proceeded down the highway.
And went down the highway into Crusoe. And
Fantastic.
that's the kind That's the kind of storm Floyd was.
That's an incredible story.
And that water stayed. And you can still see some of the marks of where Floyd changed the landscape. It's changed the way we build. It's changed the way we do business. But that's the kind of storm that was.
Yeah.
I mean, we were cut off. So.
And knock on wood, we've been pretty fortunate since then.
It's been a very calm storm season. And for all of those folks that do not remember Floyd or remember a real storm, they need to always be prepared.
Absolutely. We'll take another brief break, and we'll be back with Judge Warren.
Is 6:30 too early for a Get Fit workout? Are your weeknights too hectic to catch the West Brunswick football? Do you find yourself missing all your favorite ATMC TV shows? Well, now you don't have to. ATMC TV is airing all their latest shows on demand. Stop, pause, fast forward, or rewind. Watch your shows on your time. Tune to Channel 1 to see shows like Brunswick Biz, Get Fit, The Coastal Kitchen, and more. Stay connected to beautiful Brunswick County with ATMC TV on demand. Brought to you free by ATMC.
We're back with Judge Marion Warren. Judge, we've covered so much ground here today, but in the few minutes that we have, let's see if we can paint with a broad brush and talk about Brunswick County then, Brunswick County now. Obviously, the population change has been most dramatic. The influx of those of us from elsewhere has been equally dramatic. Give us your impressions.
You know, the last 40 years, it's been an incredible change here in Brunswick County. Between having 24,000 people where everybody knew everyone, just about in their community. Sure. My wife and I joke, but it's a truism. We would know who was coming by the sound of their car. Well, that's not true anymore.
Yeah, right.
But it's a great place to live. And the folks that have come have changed and made this a much more vibrant place to live.
For sure.
Where we were a disconnected community of proud folks doing what they could do, not knowing that there was much else to do, opportunity-wise. We have turned into a broad county with a vibrant feel, and I believe we're going to have a richer history in the future because of that. As long as we can learn from the past and not get caught up in what part of the county you live in, but rather that this is the place that we've all...
It's our county.
It's our county. We have chosen to live here because those of us that were born here could have left.
Sure.
And those of you that came,
we got here as soon as we could.
Got here as soon as you could. And we really do, as a county, have a unique opportunity. No other place looks. Where else do you know that has 40 miles of beautiful beaches and one of the largest wildlife and agricultural areas left?
Very diverse.
Yeah. And we need to appreciate it all together.
Yeah. In the next few seconds, where do you see our county 10 or 20 years from now?
I see us starting to worry about infrastructure and water. The greatest blessing we have is that the Cape Fear River dumps into the Atlantic Ocean just a few miles, 20 or so miles along our coast. We're the end user of that water. I see folks continuing to come and share in what you and I and others have come to know as the Brunswick County lifestyle, where even though we may not know everyone's name, we're still a polite, nice, and good place to live.
Absolutely.
I see us having a greater demand for infrastructure for our children in schools. I see roads and transportation continue being our greatest #1 priority. Remember that trip I talked about from my farm to Southport as a little boy? That took all day. Yeah. We'd leave it right before at daylight, and we wouldn't get back until dusk. And we can't do that anymore.
Right.
But overall, I see us growing, thriving, and prospering as a county, and I really do see southeastern North Carolina, with us specifically leading the way, being a hub and a leader for our state.
Judge Marion Warren, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it, Mr. Clark.
Thank you for joining us this month on Our Hometown. It's our hope that you've enjoyed learning about Brunswick County through the eyes of District Judge Marion Warren. If you have a story that you'd like to share on a future show, visit us at atmctv.com to tell us about it. Thanks again for joining us, and tune in again next month as we explore more of Our Hometown.
Is 6:30 too early for a Get Fit workout? Are your weeknights too hectic to catch the West Brunswick football? Do you find yourself missing all your favorite ATMC TV shows? Well, now you don't have to. ATMC TV is airing all their latest shows on demand. Stop, pause, fast forward, or rewind. Watch your shows on your time. Tune to Channel 1 to see shows like Brunswick Biz, Get Fit, The Coastal Kitchen, and more. Stay connected to beautiful Brunswick County with ATMC TV on demand. Brought to you free by ATMC.